Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another episode of M2's podcast. So we are broadcasting, streaming right across the world, based out of here in the UAE, but also fantastic to have our guest with us today, which is Alice Nawfal. But more specifically, really what we're getting in today is we're taking a deep dive into the critical world of cryptocurrency compliance and exploring the travel rule and how Notabene is revolutionizing regulatory technology in the digital asset space. My name is Lory Kehoe. I'm M2's Chief Commercial Officer. I am your co-host today, and I am very happy to say that I'm joined by my colleague, the esteemed Mr. Deepak Garg, who is M2's Chief Compliance Officer. Deepak, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Lory. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, pleasure. Look. I think I have to say here that that old saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, and I'm definitely in great company today, which proves that fact. So I have a lot to learn. Most importantly, today we're really fortunate to have Alice Nawfal, who I have been, lucky to know Alice for a number of years, back to our consensus days. And Alice is the co-founder and COO of Notabene. Alice, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Lory and Deepak, for having me here today. Very excited to be in this podcast.
No, fantastic to have you with us. And look, I think really want to dig into, crypto compliance and what the travel rule is, and how Notabene is solving that problem. But also really want to kind of dig into, get to know more about you. But look, maybe to get things going, to discuss a little bit about Notabene. What's the kind of the elevator pitch for Notabene, Alice?
Yeah, well, let's see. I'll try to keep it within a minute because those are usually, elevator pitches. But from our perspective, it's very simple. We help create trust in crypto transactions so they become a larger part of the everyday economy. Whenever you think about yourself or any of your friends or family who want to transact, they probably want to ensure that the funds are not being misused or end up in the wrong hands. And no one will ever fully trust crypto until all transactions or until all users feel their transactions are safe. So I like to think of Notabene as building kind of the backbone of a trusted ecosystem for crypto where businesses and users can transact securely and confidently. What exactly does this mean? It means that we're helping crypto exchanges and financial institutions be able to meet global regulatory requirements like the travel rule by automating pre-transaction compliance checks while ensuring smooth transactions are flowing through. We've built the largest network of trusted crypto institutions and financial institutions, which have facilitated today over $500 billion in transaction volume. That's all compliant volume across more than 80 jurisdictions. And we're very excited to continue to be able to do this by really empowering compliance officers and teams at crypto institutions like M2 and others to be able to perform that risk assessment and bring that trust to the wider crypto ecosystem.
Fantastic. Deepak, look, and these are the questions that I ask you all the time, and other people across M2. In your eyes, how would you describe the travel rule?
Why, Alice? See, again, travel rule, look at it as like a security measure for financial institutions, right? That involves virtual assets. If I have to put in layman terms, when you do a cross-border transaction or a transaction within the jurisdiction in the banks, right? There's more transparency. You know who you're dealing with, where your funds go into. It is secured, safe, right? So look at travel in the virtual asset, the same lines, but in a different ecosystem. I cannot agree more with Alice. I mean, this is the future. And if you need to increase more adoption in the crypto ecosystem, I believe travel rule is one of the key pillars to drive that.
Got it. Thank you, Deepak. Look, as we come to the end of 2024, and it has been a pretty amazing year in the crypto, blockchain, and Web3 space, and it feels like we're ending on a very strong and a very positive and a very hopeful note as we go into 2025. So wanted to get your thoughts as to where do we start, or how does the Q1 or Q2 even look like? I know we don't want to look too far into the future in the crypto space because things happen so fast, but Alice, would love to get your kind of take on where you see the first half or 2025 and what it looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It's a great question. And I'm sure Deepak can relate to this. But when we look at crypto regulations and compliance, 2024 definitely felt as if we're watching like a bullet train going really fast. There's just been so much change happening, and it's been hard to keep up, but it's been very exciting. Because ultimately what we saw kind of in the beginning of this year and kind of like leading through most of the year was a lot of regulatory clarity growing globally. So we've ended up with, I think, something more than 80 jurisdictions globally having implemented a regulatory framework for crypto. So looking ahead, what does this mean? Ultimately, when regulators put in that framework, it means that companies obviously are getting their licenses. They're implementing things like the travel rule. And going into 25 is really when the exciting work starts and the hard work starts, because ultimately that's when companies are starting to implement the regulatory requirements, their compliance kind of processes, starting to create robust risk frameworks in place and thinking about how to put that in effect. But compliance is not done in a silo. And so, for instance, Deepak explained a bit about the travel rule, but since this requires institutions to liaise with each other, to be able to privately share information with each other and take actions if a counterpart is not compliant. So, for instance, with the EU regulations that are coming into effect at the end of this month, if a counterpart of an EU institution is not performing compliance measures with them with the travel rule, they have to notify them and after some time escalate it to the regulator. So this creates a challenge when we have a world where some jurisdictions are compliant, others are not. And just kind of when we're getting to that kind of critical mass, Q1, Q2, I really expect us to be kind of working alongside with the industry to see how do we make this in practice work for everyone? How do we make sure that implementing those measures, which we're optimistic about in the long term, but in the short term, there's going to be definitely some challenges as we figure this out as an industry. And every institution wants to ensure that they're able to have those compliance flows work for them. They're not inhibiting their volumes. It's not creating a bad user experience and so forth. And so I definitely think that Q1, Q2 will be navigating this alongside kind of the industry to see how companies are going to be figuring out how to transact with each other in a very seamless and fast way.
Got it. Thank you, Deepak. Look, from a UAE perspective, there we start talking about, I guess, the travel rule in relation to the EU and MiCAR. What's your take for 2025, and how do you see the travel rule between the UAE and other parts of the world working?
See, if you look at UAE, they have definitely enforced a requirement of travel rule that came in late 2023 and then through VARA this year as well. And I'm really glad to see many of the institutions that are getting licensed out of VARA or ADGM, they're all being super compliant and want to be compliant. And travel is one of the key asks from the regulators to kind of comply with. I think the Q1, Q2 is going to be more of keeping up with the institutions that's outside the UAE, the likes of Europe and other jurisdictions. As Alice said, 80 plus jurisdictions are coming up with the requirements of travel rule. I think that's going to be more of a balance act, bringing the industry from the Wild West to a regulated industry, an ecosystem that is safe, secure to transact, to deliver and share data with across different counterparties who are also compliant. I think that's where I see the Q1 Q2 or 2025, and I'm very excited for that.
Got it. Thanks, Deepak. And switching gears for a moment, if I may, and kind of Alice, just digging into, I guess, you and your background and your journey so far a little bit. For the folks out there who haven't checked out Alice's LinkedIn profile, maybe we can put that in the comment section. It is nothing short of deeply impressive. I am deeply jealous. So I think we're seeing went to Wharton, Harvard, MIT. There aren't many universities left. I guess maybe Stanford's probably feeling a bit left out, and maybe Oxford and Cambridge, but they're probably all yet to come, Alice. So it's just nothing but deeply, deeply impressive. So, and as I said, I feel pretty inferior right now. But look, digging into this a little more, tell me. So you study mathematics, then you went on to look at some, I guess, was it public policy, and then look at more kind of, I guess, on the MBA side. But then how did you get into crypto, and then what made you start thinking about the compliance angle?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely never thought one day I'll wake up and say, hey, I'm working in crypto compliance. But I did just want to quickly say I got rejected by Stanford. Just to start the conversation.
That's just a call out to them now,
exactly.
right?
Just a call out. No, I'm just joking. But but in any case, I did want to. I guess it's interesting, like, how we started Notabene, and it definitely goes back to also the days that I knew you, Lory, at Consensus. So maybe I'll kind of start off there. But yeah, my background was more in initially strategy consulting, working with Fortune 500 businesses, kind of on go-to-market operations, things like that. And then afterwards with kind of intersection of public policy and the private sector before going back to school and doing an MBA and a policy degree. And during that time, I was really looking to pivot to the fintech industry more broadly, because ultimately I saw a lot of opportunity there. Having been born in Eastern Europe and grew up in Lebanon, I have a lot of ties to the Middle East and also Eastern Europe, where I definitely felt that in general, while we saw a lot of kind of evolution of fintech in more developed economies, we're not able to see a lot of kind of products back in the day. This was more than 10 years ago. But ultimately, in terms of kind of thinking about how do we reach a greater underserved population globally with new types of financial products, whether these are investment products or e-commerce payments, etc. I felt while there was a lot of evolution surface level, on the infrastructure side, it was a lot of duct tape. And ultimately, that meant that the costs to the end users were still prohibitive for them to really kind of access that. And so, when I first started learning about kind of crypto and blockchain, I definitely felt that this can help us build the infrastructure that we need for the next 50 years. And ultimately, fintech cannot realize its full potential without fixing that infrastructure. So that was kind of my first kind of foray into the space. The second piece, kind of like balancing off with that, was ultimately realizing that if we wanted to move transactions to a digital world, we have to be able to preserve privacy very, very carefully. Because ultimately, whether you may have a nefarious government or a nefarious corporation who can misuse that data. And so kind of putting the both of those together is, why first of all, I ended up working in infrastructure in the space. That's where I met Lory at Consensus. I had joined the Uport team, which was a team back at Consensus that was working on how to protect user data, whether it's business or a person as an end user, and make sure that they're able to manage their data and privately and securely share that with any other party. And I saw that as very fundamental for crypto to realize its full potential, but also for us to move to a more digital world with financial transactions. And so putting those together, kind of fast forwarding towards late 2019, early 2020, the Financial Action Task Force it's a global regulatory watchdog that basically brings about kind of the rules for anti-money laundering, for counter financing of terrorism and things like that. They introduced a regulatory framework for virtual assets, or crypto more generally, and for virtual asset service providers, meaning institutions that transact with crypto. And they basically said, we're going to level the playing field here. Whether it is crypto or fiat, we don't really care. But there are certain rules that as companies you have to abide by to make sure that it is low risk for your users and so forth. And so we saw this as a really great moment and a bit of a kind of like growing up moment for the space, for crypto to be more broadly adopted and integrated into the broader financial ecosystem. But what we also saw kind of within that is that requirement of the travel rule, where it tied back to what myself and my co-founders had previously been working at Consensus and thinking about very kind of broadly, which is, it's great that, blockchain transactions are, real time, it's public data, but ultimately this means that private data should never be there. But for many transactions, you need to be able to identify who the counterpart is and verify, so you can make sure for broader use cases outside of speculative kind of investment use cases, but for payments, for e-commerce, you have to be able to ensure who the counterparty is. And then from a regulatory perspective, you want to make sure that that counterpart is not a bad actor, it's not a scammer, a fraudster, etc. And so I felt kind of my worlds were married together, where we saw that kind of growing up moment for the space that would really help us fulfill that full potential that I had kind of, in terms of ideas of bringing crypto into the everyday economy, fintech, etc. But also be able to think about how do we create a scalable private kind of data layer for companies to be able to privately transact with each other while still using the public blockchain for kind of as a settlement layer.
Got it. Thank you, Alice. Deepak, when it comes to, I guess, look, when there's a, as a business, as an exchange, a crypto investment platform that M2 is, what are the things that you look for when trying to solve, regulatory, I guess, obligations that the travel rule presents?
See, obviously we look at things like solutions like travel rule, like how does it resolve the complex processes that we have to navigate day-to-day ops in terms of virtual asset space, right? How does this enhance the security? I mean, one thing that Alice highlighted was how securely are we storing your data and exchanging your data with a counterparty that can ensure safety of the data of your customers and not to be misused, right? Which is the biggest challenge that we all face in this digital world. And also to ensure regulatory adherence, to be honest, because travel rule systems, honestly, they are the biggest game changers in the compliance industry right now, if I have to say so, to be very transparent, because they help us in two key verticals of the operations. One, it reduces risk significantly because it does the counterparty verification, make sure that we're not interacting with the counterparty, let that be an exchange, or let that be a customer of the exchange, that they're not illicit actors. So it reduces risk massively from an AML KYC perspective. And it also provides us an ability to scale up and operate more efficiently, not really creating a blocker for our users, providing them seamless, safe, and secure ecosystem to transact.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, Deepak. And ultimately, when we're thinking about how do we build, sorry, I think there was just a bit of a
there's a lag. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Alice.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just following up kind of on Deepak's point here and basically saying that from the perspective of when we think about how we build product and future-proof our product, we want to make sure that we are building and kind of empowering chief compliance officers like you, Deepak, to really be able to think about kind of on a high level, what are the processes that you want kind of in place, and make sure the product is flexible enough to support this. But at the same time, we also want to make sure, as an industry, altogether and as Notabene, to not repeat some of the mistakes that were done kind of previously with the broader banking kind of sector and financial sector. And we want to make sure that those tools are really going to work for you and kind of empower your team and promote growth, rather than thinking about how it ends up maybe kind of on the other side, we end up with more kind of prohibiting of transactions.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Hopefully the lag has resolved itself there. But what I also wanted to say from an M2 perspective, I think there's a lot of proud people in M2 that are seeing a Lebanese founder as well. And there's a lot of Lebanese folks in the M2 team, so fantastic human beings, and I'm very lucky to work alongside them. So I think, yeah, a big shout out to Alice on that point as well, before I forget. So I think what you just touched a point there that I was going to ask is staying ahead of changing global regulations, Alice. How are you doing that? How are you and the team tracking that? And then how are you updating the product?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll definitely say it's definitely a challenge. And even if I just think about the UAE on its own, with multiple regulators moving at full speed, even there it's a challenge to stay ahead. I think it's really great that what we're seeing coming out of VARA, the FSRA, the central bank, it's super progressive. Together, it's a very kind of complementary and strong and robust framework. But I imagine even for M2 or for all of our customers in the UAE, it's critical to stay kind of ahead of this, but also how do you make sure that you are kind of balancing it? I will maybe kind of just take it back to also even a couple of years ago. I would say one good thing, and again, just to give a shout out maybe to the FSRA here out of ADGM, but ultimately, when we start thinking about what does it mean to stay ahead of global regulations, it did mean that we have to engage with regulators very closely and make sure that we're creating and fostering an ecosystem where regulators and industry can interact. And so back in 2021, I believe it was, we launched our first testnet, which is essentially kind of like a little sandbox environment where we invited, I believe at the time, 3 or 4 UAE-based companies and 3 or 4 Singapore-based companies, and then invited the FSRA to basically attend in a listening capacity, where they were able to firsthand hear some of the challenges and feedback from the industry on how they were implementing the travel rule. And I think that feedback was very well received, and the FSRA, was able to take that back and think about what does implementing rules mean in practice. And I think these are great examples of where you're able to create those open channels, because what we have seen is that regulators are very open to feedback, but ultimately it does take a bit of proactivity from our side. And so definitely I would say kind of this is like a very important aspect. What regulators also open is the opportunity to provide, as an industry, feedback. Sometimes they have like papers which they are able to kind of like share prior to implementing rules, where we as an industry then proactively, and Notabene definitely always takes the lead, to be able to provide feedback, again, based on working with the industry, what we think is feasible, what we think is not. Ultimately, compliance it's really hard. It's not a black or white thing. I mean, in some cases, yes, maybe with sanctions, but when it is kind of a bit difficult and the devil's in the detail, we want to make sure that, on day one, what does best look like? And then on year 1 or year 2, after some time has passed, how does that evolve? And so some of the feedback we've been actively kind of providing to regulators is, should there be a grace period introduced? Or is there kind of like a best effort approach that may be allowed in the early days until the whole industry is in a better place where kind of more robust frameworks are in place? And they've also been open to that. But ultimately, kind of, we've taken kind of that approach. And then just wanted to add kind of one aspect. We continue to do a lot of research. So obviously, besides kind of the relationship with regulators and industry, I think we've done now 3 years in a row, an industry research report on the travel rule. And for this, we end up interviewing some regulators. We do surveys of the industry. That helps us stay ahead, but then it also helps us have the industry be able to stay ahead. And most recently, we released a training where we continue to add modules to that, again, to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as we navigate this nascent space.
Got it. Okay. Well, also, Alice, we'd love, and maybe what we can do after this is, if there's a link to that training, I think that would be fantastic. Lord knows I need to take that as well. That's for sure. But maybe, Deepak, what we can look at is again, kind of going back to brass tacks and day to day of running an exchange and being our group chief compliance officer. What's the biggest challenge when it comes to implementing the travel rule solutions?
It's definitely the integration. I'm not talking about Notabene, but when I say integration, is like, you kind of liaising with multiple other counterparties that are outside the ecosystem, so inclusion of them, because not always you would have those existing counterparties in the ecosystem, trying to transact with you. There are counterparts outside the ecosystem. How can you include them and get them into the safe net of the likes of Notabene or any other travel solution, right? So that's the biggest challenge, because you don't know where your customers are having their money in the form of digital assets with an exchange that may be outside the ecosystem or inside, maybe regulated, not regulated. So those are the challenges that we kind of navigate on a day-to-day basis. And that's the biggest challenge that we have from a travel rule regulatory perspective. And also, as Alice touched point, there are many regulatory regimes that are promoting travel rule compliance, but they all are not standardized. For example, if I have to compare that with the likes of Patriot Act in the past, right, where you had your currency transaction reporting threshold of $10,000, it was standardized across the globe. Whereas you see within the UAE, just for example, you have a authority that says no de minimis threshold, then you have another authority that says equivalent to $1,000. So that also becomes a challenge from a perspective where you license from. So you need to kind of comply with your home regulators requirement and mandate that requirement onto your counterparties when you transact with them. So I think that's the biggest challenge. And I kind of look forward to year 2025. So when the ecosystem kind of grows, and as we get into the consultation from the private public partnership, I think this is one of the key areas that we need to look at. How can we have a standardization across the travel compliance globally, so that reduces friction in day-to-day life of customers transacting.
Got it. Thanks, Deepak. And one of the things there that I think is, relevant, whether it's crypto compliance or really any part of crypto, and when people are, I guess, developing an app, a solution, a plugin of any form, that integration piece, where that is seamless, that is going to solve problems and make your product, like always, a lot easier to consume, and the chances of success increase. And I know that's something that Notabene works hard on. Maybe what I can do for the kind of remaining, because we get kind of pushed a little bit on time, so somewhat of a kind of a speed round for the next 3 questions. So Alice, if you can help me understand things a bit better, and no better way to do that than to bring something to life. So if you're able to just give kind of a short synopsis on a case study or a recent example of where Notabene was used or implemented, that would be great, I think, for me and everybody else watching and listening.
Yeah, I guess something that comes to mind was last September 2023, the UK travel rule came into effect. And what we did during the summer is a sandbox within the UK's FCA sandbox environment, where the regulator invited us to participate. And we had 2 big sessions where, kind of during a time period of 3 months, we helped, I think, around 8 or 9 companies during the sandbox, together with the help of the regulator who was there listening to that input and feedback, be able to apply a phased approach to integration so companies successfully go live in September. I think this goes back to Deepak saying the integration part is difficult. And what companies did during that time, because ultimately, if you work with each company alone, that's great and you'll get them to integrate. But ultimately, what you won't start solving is how do they interact with each other? What if some, as you said, are outside kind of that ecosystem? How do we create a more open ecosystem? And how do we think about the edge cases? And so during kind of that period of time, I would say it was definitely really cool to see how, we're working alongside those companies and making sure that they are in a great shape on day one, once kind of the rules came into effect.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. In terms of the future of crypto compliance, and this is a question to both of you. So emerging trends in crypto regulation and compliance over the next 5 years. Look, that's a very lofty question. 5 years is an eternity in crypto, as we know, if we think back to where we were, 5 years ago versus where we are now. But even what we think the emerging trends are going to be maybe over the next kind of 12, 18 months. Deepak, maybe I'll start with you.
I think it's going to be expansion of the travel rule globally. We would definitely see more regimes, more authorities coming into the scope, promoting the culture of travel compliance. I think that's what I see for the longest time of the next 5 years. And also massive push on consumer protection, more advanced technological integration in terms of exchanging data in the most safe and secured way. I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that in the digital space, the protection of data is more important to avoid any illicit activity or harm on your day-to-day operation or your customers as well. And obviously, as we already have seen in year 2024, huge involvement of institutions coming into the digital asset space. And I see that growing maybe 10x or 50x the next 5 years.
Fantastic. Alice, what do you think?
Yeah, and Deepak, I think I completely agree with you. And I think that regulatory clarity is really going to help kind of be like the institutional unlock. And I do hope it's 50x, not 10x, as you kind of mentioned. And in addition to what you shared, I think from my perspective, I'd love to see us be able to move in a direction where we're not repeating a lot of the mistakes from the past of kind of the broader financial ecosystem. So when I think about crypto compliance, a few things come to mind. The first one is an open ecosystem. We want to avoid creating those closed kind of ecosystems of the past where, institutions like M2 can decide who they transact with. It's not up to the ecosystem to make those decisions, but it's up to empowering risk and compliance officers to perform that. And of course, kind of balancing with this as well is bringing kind of the latest in privacy preserving technology to compliance. So also kind of ensuring that. And finally, rounding it up with industry-led controls for DeFi to make sure that it's not regulators that come in and have potentially not very progressive kind of view on it because it's new for them as well. But ultimately, as an industry, we're able to think about what are some of the safeguards that we can bring in to unlock institutional adoption of DeFi kind of more broadly.
Got it. Thank you both very much. And then look, to close things out, I think one of the things that I'm really conscious of, and from focusing on institutions, being part of startups, and then being part of scale-ups, is that trying to give startups the best advice possible when it comes to, I guess, working in a regulated area. So what advice would you give, maybe Alice, starting with you, to startups who are operating in a regulated environment and obviously have to comply with all the various regulations that are out there?
Yes. Well, I guess my biggest advice is, first of all, just realizing that you're not alone in finding this a challenge, and there's no reason why you should take up kind of the challenge alone as well. Everyone's trying to figure this out. Regulators, your competitors, your partners, your infrastructure providers, etc. It is a nascent space that we're all kind of drawing together and building together. So definitely, I think a few kind of tidbits from this. The first one is use resources that are out there. Notabene is producing a lot of content every day, and a lot of our partners and kind of broader industry are as well. So you could definitely use that to be able to quickly catch up kind of speed. Second one, proactively build relationships with regulators and kind of like industry kind of led organizations. I think regulators are always happy to hear from companies, so I think that's really great. And the third and last bit is you can never start too early thinking about compliance. Obviously, it's always about playing the long game, and part of playing the long game is building in compliance early into your product, so it doesn't bite you back later. So you're not at some point when you have a lot of volumes have to pause everything and add it. If you are pre-launch, pre-product launch, etc., that's the easiest time. So definitely, start early.
Great advice. Thank you, Alice. Deepak, any thoughts on that one?
Not really. I would second what Alice said. I think there's a lot that you're looking ahead in terms of the travel compliance, and most of the things is like the private-public partnership, and also collaborating proactively with different industry leaders, industry-led organizations and regulatory authorities, where you kind of do the knowledge sharing and bring things up to speed, right? So you do not really have any kind of impacts on your operations, as we seen some of that, because of sudden regulatory changes, it does impact your businesses and your kind of speed. So instead of waiting for someone to come and tell you what to do, just be more proactive, take up the ownership, be there, out there, lead it from the front, and take care of this. So that's what I would say.
Got it. Okay. Thank you both for those insights and to answering all the questions that we just have gone through. What we're going to do now is we're going to move to some Q&A that folks have questions. So I think these should pop up. So how does the travel rule impact individual crypto users versus institutions? Thank you for the question, Ellen.
Yeah.
So Alice, maybe you want to go jump in?
Sure. Yes. Ultimately, crypto users should, and it's similar to how it works today in fiat, ultimately they should be shielded from what's happening with the travel. It's an institutional requirement where institutions are supposed to perform that risk assessment and share information. But what it brings to the individual crypto users is, if this was a high-risk transaction potentially, and maybe the individual crypto user did not know because they were being defrauded or something of the sort, then the transaction will probably be stopped in time, and then they would be protected in that manner. But ultimately, from a use and feel, in most cases, crypto users should be shielded from what's happening in the background, because they should just have the trust to work with institutions like M2 to kind of allow transactions to happen more seamlessly.
Got it. Maybe we'll flip to the next question. So Gabor, thank you very much. What are some of the challenges on implementing the travel rule on an institutional level? So I think we kind of just touched on that a second ago. Deepak, do you have any points you want to add on that one?
I lost you. Sorry, Lory, was the question for me?
Yeah, so when it comes to implementing the travel rule for institutions, any other pointers that you would give?
No, it's definitely around the challenges looking at data collection and verification, right? As I previously mentioned, that's the biggest challenge that we face in the industry, and lack of standardization across different regulatory jurisdictions. As I highlighted it, one of the questions that you had, and obviously, you need to kind of segregate the anonymity versus transparency. I kind of need a balancing act there, because as we have seen many of the regulators coming ahead and voicing their concerns of the anonymity in the virtual asset space, that kind of gets negated with the implementation of travel rule, where you promote more transparency, right? That lowers the risk. And as Alice said in a previous question, It's all for the safety and security of our consumers and customers, to make sure that we protect from them any wrongdoing or any like illicit transaction that they may be involuntarily engaged.
Got it. Thank you very much. Hopefully that answers your questions, Gabor. Ranjit, thank you for the question. So my question is directed to Deepak. How M2 is accommodating the inconsistent regulatory frameworks of each region?
See, we need to look at, like, in compliance, we go with the thumb rule of risk-based approach, right? So again, virtual asset itself is new, and we are kind of embracing it on a day-to-day basis. Different regions are embracing it on a day-to-day basis. So you need to be at top of your game, stay informed with the different regulatory changes, the updates that one or the other jurisdiction comes with, and you kind of stay ahead of the game, making sure that you cover that in all aspects if you are serving one of the regions from the exchanges. So at M2, what we do is we constantly keep an update of all the regulatory changes that takes place in the regions where we serve customers or we have a footprint, and we make sure we kind of comply that much ahead of time to avoid any impact on our business and our customers, more importantly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ranjit. I think we may have one more. Thank you for the question, Mark. I'm an M2 user and I saw I have two wallets. One says global and the other says UAE. And can I send crypto between them? How does M2 comply with the travel rule when sending between them? I think that's for Deepak.
Yeah, I'll take the question. Oh, of course, thanks for that question, Mark. So if you look at the global, is the wallet that belongs to our entity of Bahamas that allows you to much more services being offered, and the wallet which says UAE is a wallet that's licensed by the entity that we have out of the UAE. You of course can send transactions across the wallets. You can definitely send money in, money out between these wallets, and we do comply 100% with the travel rule, where the data that is mandated to comply and be supported with the travel rule compliance is exchanged between these two entities. Just to give a reminder, these two entities are regulated by different regulatory authorities. The M2 Global Wealth is regulated by the Security Commissions of the Bahamas in the Bahamas, whereas the M2 ADGM is regulated by the FSRA at the ADGM in the UAE. So there are two independent regulators, and they do have requirements of travel rule. Irrespective of one group, you still have the obligation to comply with travel rule. And at M2, we make sure that we 100% comply with the requirement of travel rule.
Got it. Thank you very much. Important clarifications there. And I think there's one last question. Am I correct? Yes. What is the most significant compliance challenge your clients face, and how has Notabene helped them overcome it? Alice.
Whew, I have to pick one challenge. I guess the one that really comes to mind is, and it kind of ties back to a lot of the things kind of we chatted today about, but ultimately I would say it's moving, or I guess adding those transaction checks to be done pre-transaction in real time. As an industry, we initially, because the travel was not part of it, we got used to be able to performing transactions, just by adding a blockchain address and kind of going through that. And a blockchain address is not enough to be able to identify the counterpart if there is an institution, if it's self-hosted wallet. So there, with that is kind of that first challenge that we faced as an industry. And if you want to now bring this to every transaction and perform the travel rule, there was always that fear that's going to add friction, that many transactions won't happen if you have to wait to for the counterpart institution to respond before allowing the transaction. It was just going to add a lot of friction and really kind of put at risk volumes. And so moving the industry from maybe post-transaction compliance checks to pre-transaction was definitely the biggest compliance challenge. And the way we've helped them overcome it is obviously through kind of our product. I can mention here a few things. I also talked about applying a phased approach, where we have to realize where the industry's at. In the earlier days, with only some jurisdictions having implemented travel rule, it was a bit more of a best effort approach for a lot of the exchanges versus waiting for responses from every single counterpart, just because most counterparts were in jurisdictions that had not yet implemented the travel rule. And then from our perspective, what we've done is really try to bring in kind of like seamless integrations, both on the front end. So we have an embedded component that goes into the withdrawal and deposit flows, where we basically bring in kind of specific rules that companies put in place and the regulatory rules to very quickly be able to perform those checks and automate them, and be able to collect any additional data that companies may need to be able to perform those checks. We're still not there, both as kind of Notabene will continue to kind of add features to improve this, but also as an industry. But ultimately, our hope is by the end of next year that most companies are able to perform the pre-transaction checks.
Got it. Thank you very much, Alice. And indeed, thank you very much, Mr. Deepak Garg. Look, Deepak, starting with you, if people want to follow you, learn a bit more about you and maybe some of the insights that you share, where's the best place for them to go?
The best place is LinkedIn. That's the way, that's where I kind of share my views, any updates if there is related to the compliance of the regulatory landscape of virtual asset. I'm super excited, as I said before. The next year looks solid in terms of promoting a compliance culture globally in terms of the digital asset ecosystem, and that only promotes more legitimacy and transparency in the existing ecosystem. That's going to boost it. Let's say 100x to the institutions and the whole ecosystem, as Alice is 50, are mine 10x before. So yeah, looking forward.
Thank you. It's grown 10x. Alice, and what about you? If people want to, learn more about you, follow Notabene, follow your insights, where's best to go?
Yeah, definitely for us, also LinkedIn. I think we produce a lot of content. Our team started producing little videos as well recently, and I think there's a lot of great educational content there. Also, our newsletter, there's definitely a lot that we share there on a monthly basis. And then we also, I believe, have a bi-weekly compliance newsletter, so you can also kind of stay up to date with the latest that happens. And of course, if you go through our website, we also have some fun, kind of maps where you can kind of view different regulatory kind of updates across the globe. But definitely LinkedIn, I think, is the best place.
Well, thank you very much, Alice. It's an absolute pleasure to reconnect. And I think on behalf of M2, congratulations on everything you've achieved with Notabene and the team. And we look forward to watching and partnering with you over 2025 and beyond, and wishing you every continued success. Certainly on behalf of M2, we wish everybody a happy holiday period and a very successful 2025. If you want to learn more about M2, who we are, what we do, the best place to go is you can check us out, of course, on LinkedIn, but also directly on our website, m2.com, where we are offering market-leading yield on a number of assets. So check those out as well. But that is it from us. Thank you very much for everybody for dialing in, and we will see you again in 2025 with our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.